Joining us next, Kim Powell, co-author of CEO Next Door, principal at ghSMART.com. And we want to talk a whole lot about what makes a great leader. Welcome to the show, Kim.
Thanks for having me, Ed. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Sorry for that monologue, but I usually do a lot of that sort of thing. But Kim, obviously, when you have a website that has the word "smart" in it, kind of says something about a person. It really says a whole lot about people. And I'll go on record right now. None of the websites I have actually have that word in them. Probably that by design. But Kim, tell us a little bit about, one, how you got so smart. Two, what brought you to this point?
Yes. So I must admit, the name actually comes from the true last name of our founder. So it is someone's human name as opposed to claiming we are smart. But yeah, my journey is one where I fell in love with the challenge of leadership after having worked with executives in Fortune 2000 as a strategy consultant for about 15 years and realizing really if you get the right people, you can really move mountains in a way that just getting the right strategy can never do. So I joined this firm and focused specifically on leadership advisory. So we're a leadership advisory business, and our core business is actually assessing senior leaders, which is sitting down for 4 to 5 hours, talking through their career story in exhaustive detail. We've got half PhDs in psychology, half business background individuals like myself, and we team behind the scenes to analyze the information we gather, and we go all the way back in time with each leader to early life, education, every role they've ever held, and we get all sorts of behavioral data around highs and lows, accomplishments, failures, things they're proud of, things that were disasters. And we do that to understand if they're a good fit with a particular role. And in some cases, this is for private equity-backed businesses. In other cases, it's public businesses. In other cases, it's family-run.
It's interesting you mentioned that. First of all, I would never want to go through that because I wouldn't want that to be known to the public. That's number one. Number two, it's interesting you mentioned that. Yeah, a question came in my mind just when you said that. Are we talking about pre-hire or post-hire or both?
Yeah, we do both, actually. So we will support a board in making the decision on selecting a CEO or CEO selecting someone critical to their team. And then we also do these assessments in a developmental context after hire. And an individual will call us and say, hey, I want to get better at my role. Here's what I think I need to go do. Come help provide some feedback. And in that case, we'll do other things in addition to the assessment. We'll complement it with 360 feedback, other tools that are available to provide developmental guidance and coach and support that executive in reaching their potential.
We kind of went through this yesterday with a guest that we had who's a Myers-Briggs expert and looking at some things along those lines. Does that play a role in identifying the skills, traits, and leadership styles that help you guys do what you do?
It's a great question. We tend to we will complement our work in a developmental context with off-the-shelf tools like Myers-Briggs, or we actually particularly like Hogan. Okay. But we don't tend to see that predictive in a hiring context. Our approach methodology is based on behavioral patterns. And, when you think about the markets, history doesn't predict the future. But if you're looking at a human being with a context of 18 to 24 months runway and delivering results, looking at behavioral patterns and the commonality of the context in which they've delivered those results, how similar or dissimilar is that context to what you need them to do in the future? Frankly, behavioral patterns we found to be the most predictive.
Well, you mentioned behavior. Let's go on record and say you brought that up. You say that in the CEO Next Door, you say there's 4 behaviors that transform ordinary people into world-class leaders. Talk about those. Yeah,
so the research we did was actually on this data set of assessments we talked about. So we've done 17,000 assessments over the course of our firm's history. And we did both text-based and traditional quantitative research, and we complemented it with interviews, specifically looking at what differentiates high-performing CEOs. And surprisingly, 4 things came back as clear, statistically relevant correlations with high performance, and it was 4 behaviors. The first is decisiveness. and I'll circle back and define these, but I'll run through them up front. Decisiveness. The second is proactive adaptation, so being able to change yourself and your organization quickly and rapidly. The third is reliable delivery. And the fourth is engaging for results. And so these were the four things that differentiate high-performing CEOs from those that were lower performing. And interestingly, all of these are buildable muscles. What didn't come back was sort of intrinsic God-given IQ or height or where'd you go to school, for example, things that are tougher to change. And so we were encouraged by what we found. And as we started to dig into the results, we realized there's some worthwhile things to share more broadly. And the idea of the book was born, and we embarked on this process of putting it down on paper and talking about it.
Well, one thing you mentioned, you said they're decisive, and you also said those are buildable muscles. In the minute or so we have, how do you teach someone or how do you coach someone at that level to be decisive?
Yeah, so it's really about speed and conviction, deciding quickly, not being right. So if you tend to love data and need the nth degree of analysis, you got to stop yourself and build in controls and people around you that can complement you and help you to push to a quicker call. 2 questions you can ask to improve the speed at which you make decisions. The first is asking yourself, what's the downside if I get this decision wrong? How much could it really cost me? And then on the flip side, gosh, how much will I slow down others in my organization by delaying this decision even another hour or another day? And wrestling with those 2 questions can help you move more quickly.
Perfect. We'll actually come back on the other side. We'll talk about a couple other things that I want to bring up that I think will be really interesting here as far as that's Kim. So hang on for a second. We'll be back on the other side of this. This section is a show brought to you by the Vitamin Patch. We'll be right back. Welcome back to CEO Money. It's Ed Baxter sitting in for Michael Yorba. We're speaking with Kim Powell, co-author of CEO Next Door and principal at ghSMART.com. Kim, when we left off, a couple of things came to my mind as you started talking about some of the management styles of CEOs and what makes them good, what makes them not so good. I looked at the list of things you had, and as a former trader, a lot of those things that I see are functions or behaviors that were consistent with some of the top traders we had when I was at Fidelity, or we won't mention anymore, but when we were trading. So when I think about the quote unquote the CEO, I think about some other things you have here with regard to those people or the number of people who graduated from Ivy League schools and how they're represented at the CEO level. What are some of the common traits other than some of the ones we see here that just to mention, just common traits that you may have seen that may not have made the top 4, but are very important in a CEO's responsibility or their ability to be responsible in running a company?
Yeah. And you point out a couple good things there. But one thing I want to touch on is that, the behaviors we did see is really critical differentiators are actually behaviors a lot of leaders can build and exhibit at any stage of their career. And frankly, a lot of the leaders we were talking with who made it to the CEO seat were practicing these behaviors well earlier in their career. So that's kind of the one point. The other thing you brought up that I thought was interesting was this whole sense of Ivy League and pedigree. And frankly, what we came away from this research saying to ourselves is this iconic CEO that always gets written about is a mythical creature. I mean, the only perfect CEO I know is the one that doesn't exist. I mean, it's just not the case. And so, part of this was unlocking the fact that, look, if you look at a broader suite of leaders out there, not just the Fortune 500, you start to realize there's a lot more potential than you think to get into that role. And so some of the things that we saw that weren't in those top 4, but we did see in the successful CEOs, first is how they approached mistakes and, frankly, failure was different. If the high performers looked at failure as an opportunity to grow, frankly, the actual term failure, the more leaders used the term I failed, it was a failure, the less likely they were to be in the camp of successful CEOs. And so, those that are successful look back and say, you know what? that was a mistake and I could have done a lot better, and these are the 5 things I would do differently today. And I think, the single most undervalued asset in business today are exactly those mistakes we all make. And it's hard to look back, but if you do, you can grow quite a bit as a result. So that's one thing I would highlight.
When I speak to business owners and entrepreneurs, I always talk to them about perseverance and resiliency. Those are 2 things I think play the biggest role in trying to push success forward, because if you can't persevere and understand that if you made a mistake, you can overcome it, and if you can't be resilient after you make that mistake, it becomes a challenge for you to go forward and look at the next goal you're trying to get and how to get through it. One thing about CEOs is there's kind of an elite class of people for the most part. So I guess the question that I would throw out there is, why is information regarding their behaviors relevant to the rest of us?
Yeah, great question. Number one is, I think these are evergreen behaviors that are helpful to anyone who's looking to grow in their careers. And these were leaders that were achieving and desiring to make a big impact and amplify their impact on the world across their careers. And there are a lot of people out there who want to do that in different ways. And so I think the behaviors clearly matter from that standpoint. I think also, most of these folks who ended up at the top didn't know they wanted to be there in the outset. They actually didn't realize they wanted to be leading organizations till, the role before CEO or 2 roles before. So there's a lot of folks early in their career that, gosh, maybe want to have an impact, not sure yet, don't know. And frankly, these, if you want to grow in your career and take on more responsibility, these are things that can help you get there. I think the last point is, gosh, in our data set, there were more CEOs that did not have college degrees than had Ivy League degrees. That in and of itself, I think can unlock people's mindset around this is actually more accessible than maybe I thought it could be. And we need more leadership. We need more great leadership in our country and our world today. So to the extent that this can help more people amplify their impacts, we want to help.
Well, Kim, typically when I do these sorts of things, I like to throw what I call my Clayton Kershaw curveball. And here's an example I would think in that fashion. When you look at what you've done and the research you've done, you think about the type of leaders that are there. We got a couple of minutes here, so we won't hold you too long. But when you think about those things, what are the obstacles you see? What are the things you saw that really threw you for a loop as far as those abilities that you saw in some of these leaders that was totally unexpected?
Well, the biggest obstacle is that what gets you hired is not always what drives performance. So first of all, you got to get into these roles, right? And there are people making those decisions. And unfortunately, there's a lot of barriers associated with getting into the seat, particularly if you don't, there's a lot of biases. A lot of people talk about it. I know you've had folks on the show actually talking about some of that too. So I do think the biggest barrier is understanding what gets you hired, making sure you can have those muscles and get into the seat, and also recognize that those aren't necessarily the same things that you're practicing to be successful. And the biggest thing that drives hiring that is not correlated with performance is likability. So when you show up in the interview, likability matters, warmth matters, energy matters. But frankly, we didn't see that correlated with high performance once you're in the seat. So I think the biggest barrier is making sure you know not just what it's going to take to deliver results, but how to get the nod and the yes, and to get the position to start having that impact.
I couldn't agree more. Kim, we're about out of time. If people are interested in getting your book and getting information as far as your company is concerned, how do they go about doing that? Yeah,
CEOnextdoorbook.com will give you information about the book.
Wow.
And our firm is at ghSMART.com.
Perfect. Kim, thank you very much for joining us. I look to talk to you again because you have you open a lot of things I just want to talk more about, and obviously I'll start monologuing if I don't, so I apologize for that. But again, thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back.
Thanks for having me.